Hey guys, today I wanted to talk a little bit about Gwent and Artifact and sort of some of the differences between the two games, maybe the similarities, and more than that, which game does what better in terms of the fun aspect, complexity, randomness, price, and competition. Now bear in mind this stuff is, you know, taking into account only what we've seen or what I've experienced from the game so far. Both can change with time, and also just my opinion. Others are going to disagree, have their own opinions on a lot of these different topics, but this is kind of where I'm coming from concerning both games. So let's just kind of jump into the first topic with both Artifact and Gwent, and that is which game is more fun to play, in my opinion. Um, Right now, I'm not having too much fun playing Gwent. Honestly, the game feels kind of dull. I can't really say how much of that is to do with there not really being any pro ladder season going on and no real incentive to play or whatever. Or maybe it's just that I've played a lot of Gwent and it's become a little bit stale, over the years, or the year that I've been playing it. And whereas, Artifact is new and novel and, a lot more going on right now in it. That might be the case. However, Gwent I'm finding pretty boring. Like the games they play out kind of monotonously. I don't know if that's the word, but it really feels like there's not much room for outplaying your opponent. Um, the games don't really feel like they matter. Like I don't really care if I win or I lose. I'm not jumping on Gwent to play it every day because I want to, or have some kind of really big enjoyment from it. Artifact is kind of the opposite. The game is a lot more fun. It's engaging. I care if I win or lose in it. Games can be close and they feel exciting and intense. Um, but similarly, I'm not like completely, Artifact is the best game ever, super fun, playing it all the time. I'm not coming at it from that direction either. It's more Artifact is above Gwent, but it's not, above some other games that I play for fun, necessarily. So yeah, in my opinion, I think Artifact is the more fun game right now. That could change as December patch for Gwent. Artifact, things may happen in the future for that. It may become boring the more I play. Kind of who knows. And this fun point is going to be very, dependent on the person. So me finding one thing fun doesn't mean you won't find the other thing more fun and vice versa. But yeah, from my point of view, Artifact is better in that regard. So the next aspect is sort of the complexity of the game and the depth and the thinking involved in playing the game. I kind of touched on this a little bit already, but Gwent does feel a little bit boring and kind of pointless playing games. I mean, that's kind of a harsh thing to say, but that's really the feeling that I get when I play. Um, there's not too much thinking involved. The thinking is in moment to moment gameplay more so than anything. Maybe you make the thought in your head that I need to play round one out so I can maybe bleed a little bit in round two. That's kind of the only grand strategy that really comes in with Gwent these days. Maybe you have that thought, maybe you don't need to have that thought. Depends against what deck you're playing and what deck you are playing yourself. Um, but yeah, the moment to moment gameplay is just how do I get the most points from these cards in my hand. Not really super complex, not really super deep. A lot of the mechanics have been removed from the game, and replaced with a few new ones, especially orders. But taking out other mechanics such as spies, the old strengthening effect, the old reveal effect, these different things. And yeah, they've been partially replaced in some cases, but not fully. And that kind of just leads to a little bit of lack in depth, I feel. So I definitely think Artifact is stronger in this regard in its complexity and definitely the thinking that goes into every game. Um, Gwent feels a lot more autopilot, or almost you just play the card that is best for the moment, and that's probably a problem Gwent's always had. But the complexity has come in the pass spots and the finding the way to outplay your opponent, which I feel like the game doesn't have as much of anymore with the new hand limit and drawing three cards in each round. It's kind of limiting your options for bleeding your opponent. Similarly with the removal of spies and all that stuff. Just feels like there's a lot less you can do in Gwent now. You just kind of play your cards and probably end up even cards in round three and just see what happens. Yeah, depending on what deck your opponent plays and stuff like that. Yeah, it just feels all the same, not too much thinking involved. So Artifact is kind of the opposite. It's every little play you make matters. It can very often be the case that an obvious play is wrong, or a play that might look good is actually not so good, that sort of thing. Vice versa, maybe you can look really deep and find some plays which are very clever, and in fact, the more you play of Artifact, the more sort of little nuances you find and little sort of improvements in your gameplay and little tricks that you can perform in games and stuff like that, which yeah, that could be down to the novelty of Artifact again, and the discovery of strategies and plays and stuff like that could be a result of its novelty. But as I say, it feels more complex and more deep. Every decision you make feels very important and impactful. Especially hero placement is like a huge thing to think about, and you can play it in multiple different ways. Not necessarily one correct way to play it. A lot of it revolves around picking one strategy and way to play the game out, and then following that line of play. Um, maybe following a line of play and then diverging from that to kind of trick your opponent potentially. And it just feels like, yeah, there's a lot of mechanics in the game. The different archetypes, I guess you could say, are quite fleshed out and they feel good to play and yeah, complex. And there's much more on top of the traditional card game in Artifact. You know, it's not just a Hearthstone, it's not just a Magic, it's aspects drawn from all the card games that are out at the moment, like Gwent, Magic, Hearthstone, that sort of stuff, all just kind of clumped together into one really complex and deep sort of thing. And this is also kind of a negative point. I just wanted to, mention that it is difficult for beginners. It's a really tricky learning curve with Artifact, and the game kind of puts you off at first, and then maybe you kind of realize that complexity and you kind of understand the game more and it becomes better. But anyway, the long and short of that is Artifact is the more complex game right now, I think, and I don't know if that's really arguable. I think Gwent has kind of lost a lot of its depth and a lot of its complexity, and Artifact even maybe would have more than old Gwent had. Artifact is very deep, there's a lot going on with it, maybe even too much, maybe it's too complex, you could argue that. Um, but yeah, I think Artifact is the more complex game. So the next topic is RNG, randomness in the game, the amount of games that are decided purely by random effects. Um, and interestingly enough, I actually think Gwent has less RNG right now than Artifact. Um, and this depends what game mode you play in Artifact, and it's not always, randomness deciding a lot of stuff, but Gwent has some bad RNG in places, Reveal, the new Mulligan system, and to a degree the new card draw system and less thinning overall than in previous Gwent. Um, and yeah, that's more RNG than there was in old Gwent. However, Artifact is still probably quite, miles ahead of Gwent in RNG actually, um, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Some people are always saying, variance is better, it makes games more interesting, and kind of that is the case. I mean, Artifact is a more fun game, even with, it having more randomness, in my opinion at least. I do have some issues with the amount of randomness there is in Artifact, there's no doubt about it. In Constructed, you have a lot of draw RNG, more than in most games because you don't have a mulligan at all, no mulligans. So if one player has a really good hand, one has a really bad hand, the player with the good hand's usually going to win in Constructed, guys. It's not too, it's not, you're not able to play around that to, a very large degree. And there's obviously smaller RNG moments in both the draft format and the limited format. Things like creep spawns, placement of heroes, and things like that. The arrows that decide where you're attacking or not. And a lot of that stuff is, it can be played around. You are shown what's going on before you make your plays. So you can play around the randomness to some degree. And a lot of that stuff doesn't decide the game. But for Constructed, the draws and no mulligans, that's a really big deal, and it makes a lot of games unwinnable that could be winnable if there was a mulligan system or if there was less RNG. So basically what I'm saying is, yeah, Constructed, lots of RNG moments, and some of it matters, some of it doesn't, but yeah, some games are 100% just decided by randomness, which not a positive for me. Also in draft, you've got obviously the deck building RNG. If you get better cards than your opponents, you're going to have a better deck. You're going to be able to beat them a lot of the time. The most recent draft tournament, there were some not so good decks, not so good players. I say not so good decks, I mean deck building. Um, Good decks, but then sloppy implementation of those decks by some of the players who still managed to do very well in the tournament. And then stronger players not doing so well just due to that not drafting good decks. So there is variance in the draft process, and that's going to result in some tournament winners being, not necessarily the best players, and equally not necessarily having the best players winning tournaments. That will probably balance out if you play a lot of tournaments, but it's worth mentioning, right? There is a fair amount of randomness in basically every mode that Artifact has. It's quite RNG heavy, maybe even more so than Hearthstone and Magic, any game like that. I think there's a really large amount of RNG. For some people, that's not going to be too much of an issue. For me, I really dislike it. I wish there was less RNG in the places where the RNG is bad, things like the draw, what cards you're getting, and maybe you could tone down the draft RNG a little bit with no duplicate heroes, something like that. Um, and the smaller RNG moments don't matter as much usually, but there are some cards like Cheating Death, for example, which is really, really not good design and just big RNG, which decides games a lot of the time. So yeah, Artifact has more randomness than Gwent, and that's a big negative for me. The game's still fun, as I say, but the RNG is definitely, yeah, not not a healthy amount in my opinion. But you might disagree with that once you get your hands on the game, or if you have already played it. That's fair enough. And the next topic is price. As everyone knows, Gwent is very free to play friendly. You can basically not pay any money at all and play the game and get access to the whole game if you play enough. Um, Super friendly in terms of the economy, unlike pretty much any card game that is on the market right now. So Gwent is basically impossible to beat in terms of price. And that's obviously a positive for it. Artifact will be $20 plus however much you need to spend to get full collection if you want it. Play draft mode or whatever. Probably won't cost more than $100 for the average player would be my guess. Probably less for most people, maybe $50 to $70, something like that, which I think is not unreasonable for a card game in the current day and age. Although people are complaining about all that stuff, doesn't really affect me that much. I can see why a free to play game, like completely free to play, is a lot better in many regards, but whatever. That is that. Competition is the last topic, and obviously Artifact kind of is winning in that regard. There's clearly a lot of big prize pools going on, a lot of tournaments happening, both even before the game has come out. Gwent, on the other hand, kind of really lacking community-driven tournaments with any kind of prize pool. You've had Red Dragon, that was kind of the last big one. That was very many months ago, right? And there's not going to be like an official tournament until like February or March, something like that. So Gwent is really not doing well in terms of showcasing high level play, at least for the moment. And obviously that's because Homecoming's come out. They don't want to do too much to, mess with stuff while the game is fresh and imbalanced and all this stuff. But really, I think, if you're a competitor, Artifact is the go-to at the moment. It's got the $1 million prize pool, tournament or winner, tournament coming up. A lot of community tournaments will happen with substantial prize pools, and maybe even smaller ones that less, maybe not the professional players can take part in and win money. So yeah, Artifact definitely has Gwent beat in that regard. I really hope CDPR, take some notes from Artifact and really support the community-driven tournaments more than they've done in the past. That's really been maybe not a good move by CDPR to not properly allow that stuff to take place. I can kind of see they don't want to, have their own official tournaments overshadowed by community ones, but it's much better to have lots of tournaments going on than not many. Obviously, you're going to have more people competing, more people playing, more people watching, and that's all just better for the health of the game and the player base and all that stuff. So yeah, that's pretty much it. That's kind of the different places I wanted to compare Artifact and Gwent to each other. They're very different games. I should probably point that out, and they're going to appeal to very different people. Um, some will not enjoy Gwent, some will not enjoy Artifact. That's okay. Um, but yeah, overall, I think Artifact right now is the game that I would play if I had to pick one over the other. It's more fun, it's more complex, it has more RNG, which is a downside. It costs more money, which is also a downside, but the competition is also going to be a lot bigger than Gwent's. So, yeah, they both, of course, have their positives and negatives. Probably for a lot of people, this was obvious, and this video is maybe a bit redundant, but I just wanted to you know, make my thoughts into a concise little video. Maybe not super concise, but you know what I mean. And yeah, get those out for you guys to see. Anyhow, let me know if you're going to try Artifact. If not, um, why won't you? Probably the price will be a reason for a lot of people. Um, but yeah, I hope you enjoyed this little ramble of mine, and I'll see you next time.